Welcome to the Sunday Brunch with Ben and Ned. I am Ben.
I'm Ned. And this is our very good friend, Michael Collins.
Hello.
We've been wanting to have you on the show since the inception, since the conception, since the beginning.
Does it begin at inception or conception?
I think there's an inception and then a conception.
And here's the fruition.
Mike is a friend of ours. I am happy to say, is probably the funniest person I know.
No pressure.
No pressure. Only person I'm willing to
We
say
can edit that out, right?
who's funnier than I am. By the way, Facebook, Sunday Brunch with Ben and Ned. Like us and comment anything you want to talk about, any questions you have for our good friend Michael Collins. Glad you're here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad
Sir, thank you for
glad
having
to be here doing this with both of you.
Yeah.
We're under the spotlights. I tell you, we're sweating bullets. So just we'll edit that out.
Well, it's because of how intense the
It
subject
has
matter
an
is today.
intensity to it.
We're going to talk about what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. Is our first topic up at bat. For a little background, the police shot and killed an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown, and supposedly he had his hands up. He was surrendering. There was no reason in the world why he should have been shot.
And this was about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
This was about 2 weeks ago, and the community has just, obviously been outraged about it since then. There has been some rioting, some disturbance, some looting and plundering. I guess a gas station was burned down. I
Really?
heard.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
and it escalated to a point of martial law.
Yeah.
And so it's become a talking point for a lot of different issues, not necessarily racism, but also the militant police forces and all kind of things. So how do we even approach this? What's our first
Did you hear about this
angle?
story?
I haven't kept abreast of it constantly, but I do know the broad strokes, unfortunately, and I have a good feel for what has been going on. I don't know all the details, but
Me neither. I've heard different accounts of the shooting itself. There was a robbery reported. There's video of a convenience store where it's probably Michael Brown reaching over the counter, grabbing some cigars or maybe some lottery tickets or something. Probably cigars, I think, is what it's
I think it
supposed
was
to
cigars.
be. And he's on his way out, and the clerk tries to stop him, and he pretty forcefully pushes him away. Not that that incident even necessarily has anything to do with the shooting itself. He was stopped. He and a friend of his were stopped because they were walking down the middle of the street by a police officer. I've heard different accounts. Was the officer responding to a call about the robbery or not? Did he stop them because he thought they were suspects, or stop them because they were jaywalking? I've heard different accounts. All came out at different times.
Yes.
There's confusion about what the police have released about that. Some reports say that he attacked the police officer in the police car and punched him. Some reports say he was walking away. I don't know what's the most credible now. I think it's pretty clear that he was shot several times.
Mm-hmm.
That is the one thing I think we do know.
So it's hard to say. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine it was a justifiable shooting when he could have probably used pepper spray, a taser. There's a lot of other recourses before the shooting.
Yeah, live ammunition is ideally a last resort kind of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons. This is kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? I mean, it's not like this is the first time the police have shot somebody under questionable circumstances in this country.
Right.
Now, I got to say, my brother is a police officer, and he's a good cop. I got to say, he is a good cop. I got to believe that, and believe that most police officers are trying to do their best, are not out to hurt people. And yet, yes, I know for me, in my Facebook news feed, I almost every day see, at least on a weekly basis, accounts, videos, or stories of people who are being, if not killed, at least kind of an escalation of what would seem to be undue over response, over escalation of force.
Mm-hmm.
to the perpetrator or to the potential criminal, you know.
And that's a problem even if you're just carrying around pistols. It's an even bigger problem, I think, when you have a police force that's equipped with, militarized vehicles and bulletproof vests and assault rifles and the kind of equipment that people go to war with. That kind of takes the overuse of force to a whole nother level.
You do get a feeling that it kind of sets the stage for a bad situation to become a much worse situation when you have that much firepower. I don't really know that they need to have that much firepower in that situation. I think that the police having a certain level of armament is great and fine. I wouldn't want them to not have it if they needed it. But I think maybe a little more judicious use of it, a little more thought out application of it might be a good idea. I think that they've already have a powder keg on their hands and rolling down the street in armored vehicles with full tactical units might not be the sort of impression and the sort of message they want to be portraying at this moment. I think they want to calm things down, and I think they really haven't managed that very well at this point. So
I think Andy Griffith would have taken a whole different tact.
yes, absolutely. And Barney only had one bullet, and he never even fired it.
Except at himself. I think he may.
That's right.
He may
And
have shot
what
himself
does that tell us right there? So
Right. We better hope he doesn't do it again. See what I did there? Michael, in honor of you, I had to do at least one very bad pun.
Oh, I'm just sweating even more now. Goodness.
Now, one Diamond, one thing to be gleaned from this story is people are talking about the militarization of police forces across the country.
And what does it mean? What is it for? I'm with you. I don't want to see the people that we've entrusted to protect and serve ill-equipped to do their job. However, I can imagine literally no circumstance where that kind of equipment is needed. Why do police need camo gear? For Christ's sake, you're in an urban environment. You're in the city. Why are you dressed in military camouflage fatigues, if not psychological fear factor? Is that that's what I get from that.
And why do you need a tank?
And why do you need a tank?
Well, I can tell you why. It's because of the war on drugs, basically. When police forces aren't just defending people's rights, when we're tasked, it's a natural result. When we ask the police to do things that are of an aggressive nature, to enforce laws that are invasive of a law, and it's not just the war on drugs, but I think the war on drugs, prohibition of marijuana and all drugs, is the most invasive. People are doing things voluntarily with their own bodies, and yet there's a law telling them they can't. We know for prohibition of alcohol, same thing. The only way to enforce that is when the police are acting in aggression.
Mm-hmm. When they're empowered to come into your home, to come into your property. Before prohibition, there's literally, how many circumstances can you imagine in which a police officer needs to come into your home?
Right.
If you are at home on your own property, what law could you possibly be breaking? Who could you possibly be harming?
And you can think of a few, examples. If there's a report that you're holding someone hostage in your house, if there's a report of child abuse within your house, but for the most part, right, it's only an act of it's nonviolent crime that's going when there's more and more laws and regulations. It could be other things as well, but primarily drug laws. Then it's only a natural result that they need the firepower because they are not defending just as they are the aggressors now.
Yeah, that's why they need flash grenades to throw through the window. Yeah.
Well, I think that maybe one thing that's getting lost in the shuffle with everything that's going on in Ferguson is the police are there to. The main function of a police force is to enforce the law, but also to maintain stability. And sending the message that they send when they have that much firepower is not really smoothing things out. They need to focus on smoothing out, calming the frayed nerves, There's a lot of anger, a lot of tension. You only add to it when you roll out with that much weaponry.
Sure.
So they need to be brave about it. Put away the weapons. Just appear as regular street cops. I think they would be fine. I think it would calm things down. Stop escalating.
Right.
Stop raising things up. Because there's no reason to come out with that sort of presentation unless you're ready to rock and ready to fight. And
Pointing sniper rifles
Yeah.
down at people who are peacefully assembling. That's
Right.
That's one main report.
Right.
Is they're treating peaceful assemblies and protesters as if they are the rioters trying to break in through people's store.
Right.
If someone's throwing a can through a storefront window, yes, either the owner of the store or the police or somebody has the right to use force to stop them and defend it. If people are marching down the street chanting, it's uncalled for to be either spraying them with pepper spray or pointing
Tear-gassing
guns.
them.
Yeah.
It is. It's uncalled for. And also, there's something. It's not just that they're adding to this element of aggression, but they also something's missing that needs to be added to the situation that only the police can do, as the frontline representation of the government right there with the people, and that is to represent the government, but to represent it in an open, calm, official, sympathetic manner, to direct the flow of anger, protest, whatever, but to, I don't want to deflect it, but to calm it,
Sure.
and to not meet aggression with aggression.
And I think
And
that's
to
been
calm it
mishandled.
down. And I think that's been greatly mishandled, and it's not even a question of should they have the weapons, shouldn't they have the weapons, should they bring it out or should they bring it, well, they shouldn't bring it out, but it's something that's missing. It's not even something that they're doing wrong, it's something that they're failing to do right. And they need to calm, and they need to represent the government, because if you don't represent a calm, stable, caring faction of the government, then people are going to build it up in their own minds as to what it is, and they're going to represent it as an ugly, vicious, aggressive thing. They add to that by actually rolling out with the knee pads, tactical weapons, and I didn't see any dogs, but I'm sure they were there. But
And you impose a curfew on the citizens. Journalists and reporters show up to cover what's happening, and they get tear gassed, and
Yeah.
their equipment gets seized and dismantled. I mean, it's really, Hollywood martial law
it
kind
really
of scene.
is. You're not doing yourself any favors. You're throwing fuel on the fire, and you're giving people who are already angry only more reason to be angry.
I mean, the conspiracy theorists among us, if we didn't have enough evidence already, you're really just making it look bad.
Well, and so in
Giving
that,
me a lot to work with.
the only plus is that more people are kind of talking about these things that they never would have talked about before. So if anything,
True.
they're hearing the term militarization of the police.
For the first
That's
time,
very true.
a lot of people in the last 2 weeks are hearing that for the first time.
They're hearing about over-escalation. They're hearing about citizens' rights. They're at least thinking about these things. That otherwise it's kind of me and Ben and a few other people ranting to each other.
While
Ranting on the internet about.
Well, not too long ago, there was a shooting of homeless people in New Mexico, and there was actually demonstrations and protests on
Yeah.
the streets of Albuquerque. That really erupted for a second, but it didn't get national attention.
Right.
It showed up in my Facebook news feed, I'm sure yours too, because we're kind of plugged into the organizations that are paying attention.
Right.
But the nation at large had no idea that there were innocent people being killed by the police in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
They didn't know that there were protests about it. It barely was a blip on the radar. But this incident has become a hot topic and
Just
the
touched
kind
the
of
zeitgeist.
issue. Yeah.
Zeitgeist,
I know it's one of your
It
favorites.
is very good. It's my favorite pastry. It's so good.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on the racial issue, and for a lot of people, maybe that's why this has struck a chord.
A central issue.
A white police officer shooting an unarmed black man. He was a teenager. I think he's 18,
I think you just graduated from high school.
and big. And in fairness, in objectivity, not a small, not a scrawny little teenager, possibly an imposing force, intimidating just because of his size.
Sure.
Not to you or me, because we're huge.
I'm I'm old and frail. Anything's an imposing force. This chair I'm sitting in is an imposing force to me. So, yeah.
So again, so it could be a racial issue, and that's definitely something to touch on.
I think it definitely is
Yeah.
a racial issue, whether or not you want to admit it or not. It is.
Oh, it is. Yes.
I don't want to admit.
Well,
It
Well,
is.
it's out
sorry.
there.
It is.
Sorry for you.
And like we said, we see plenty in our news feeds of white people, of men, women, of all races, being the victim of possibly undue escalation of and militarization of of the drug war primarily again, or of brutality in
Mhm.
general, whether it's a white cop or a black cop or any color of the rainbow.
That's
True.
true.
That's very true.
Abuse comes in a plethora, in a cornucopia.
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there are police officers of every ethnicity, just as there are citizens of every ethnicity. In Ferguson, I think the stats are pretty skewed, and that the police force is almost entirely Caucasian, and the population is at least 60% African American.
Yeah.
And sadly, when you look at statistics nationwide, I think, racial profiling or stereotyping, just kind of playing the odds when it comes to being a cop and trying to stop crimes from happening. They may not be legitimate crimes, but if your job, your supervisor, the chief, says, go out there and stop the potheads from smoking the pot, you go out, and who are you going to stop?
You probably.
Probably.
In a second,
You can make a case that I could be considered a pothead, but disproportionately,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
blacks, Hispanics are stopped. There's probably stereotyping that goes on apart from race. If you want to bring in the thug culture, which appeals to blacks, whites, Hispanics, everybody.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you dress a certain way and carry yourself a certain way, you're kind of sending out this signal that I participate in this lifestyle, that I am for these activities.
It's true.
Disproportionately stopped, or disproportionately arrested, and disproportionately convicted.
Imprisoned.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
sure.
Well, it's quite a fun topic we have here on this Sunday brunch. Any?
Can we take away anything from it? Have we learned anything? Is there any proactive steps to be taken?
That's the real question. Do you feel that there's anything that'll be different after this? Any changes?
Well, I like to be optimistic. To be honest, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Just in this nation as a whole, there is, and again, I relate this whole thing to the drug war, the war on drugs, which is a war on people who do stuff with their own bodies.
We're seeing some good signs. I mean, there is
Yeah.
a movement towards legalization and away from the draconian laws of the 80s.
Right.
At least around marijuana. At least, and so yeah, there is some progress
Well,
there.
they're lightening up on. I have heard.
mandatory minimum sentences
Yeah.
are no longer a popular and supported
Right.
policy,
This is-
except in Alabama, I guess.
And I've heard that there's a growing growing influence. I'm talking about drugs. There's a growing influence. That's good. We could edit that out anyway.
I think we'll leave it in.
But there's a growing movement to match the parity of stereotypically white offenders who are caught with powder cocaine versus black offenders who are caught with rock, cocaine, crack.
Right.
And they suffer much greater penalties and jail time than the powder guys do. And that really adds to that huge disparity when it comes to prison sentencing, racially and stuff like that. I heard that there's a lot of attention on that now, and there's some movement, so a flicker of hope.
Nice.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, segregation is still a living memory in
Yes.
this
Yeah, you're
country.
right.
There are people old enough to recall
mm-hmm.
racial segregation, and so it seems to some of us as though that's this thing from the distant past, but it really
Yeah.
wasn't that long ago. And the institutions in this nation are probably still swinging back, trying to find balance and fairness.
You move with that glacier speed. slowly. It's just
Because
slow,
if there's
steady-
anything that bureaucracies are known for, it's
It's
being
efficient.
quick to adapt and respond.
actually the efficiency of a Swiss watch. Exactly.
Well, I think we're wrapping it up for our first segment here
Okay.
on the Sunday Brunch. We're going to put a link here for you to be able to click on to come back and watch the second half with our good friend Mike Collins. We're going to talk, do we give him a little teaser?
Let's give them a little teaser. We're going to talk about atheism, theism, non-theism, agnosticism, and all sorts of other isms.
Isms.